The importance of building muscle is bigger than ever. So that's what I'm going to discuss in this video. How you should be building muscle and why you should be building muscle. And I'm going to be doing all of that whilst doing a leg workout. So let's get into it. Now, a lot of people start building muscle purely for the aesthetic reasons. And I would be lying if I said that that wasn't the main reason as to why I started all them years ago when I was 16, 17. But we're not going to discuss the aesthetics of muscle, nor are we going to discuss the functionality and the purpose of muscle when it comes to moving the skeleton. Even though these are highly beneficial, I will discuss them in another video. The main thing that I want to discuss in this video is the metabolic importance of having a higher muscle mass. And as a population, the more patients that I see that have lower muscle masses tend to be the ones who have higher amounts of metabolic dysfunction. Now, I picked a leg workout to do this today. One of the reasons is because it just fell within the way I was training that week. But as a lot of people do know, that the legs do house the highest amount of muscle mass in the average person. So by training these and trying to grow as much muscle as possible, then you will have the greatest rewards and benefits when it comes to improving metabolic health. Now, I've used metabolic health as a term already quite a lot in this video. So what is it? And a lot of people think of metabolic health as, or when it goes wrong, as diabetes, which is a good way to look at it really, because it all involves insulin. And insulin is an anabolic hormone, meaning that it likes to store energy. So whether that be putting glucose or sugar away as glycogen within muscles, increasing the amount of amino acids being put away into muscle, and increasing the amount of fat storage that goes on. And when this all goes wrong, it normally leads to diabetes. And a lot of people tend to focus on the glucose aspects. That's the only reason why you can't put too much weight when you're doing it like this, because it just slips. And that is the disadvantage of not doing it on a machine. But anyway, it's better than doing nothing, I suppose. So a bit off topic there, but yeah, like I said, I have a home gym, so I'm fortunate enough to do that. But when it comes to training a lot of these muscle groups, for example, so legs, you need to put the muscle under enough stress and volume to grow. So in this case, I'm doing 8 reps. It's on about 70 kilos on a single leg press. It's a bit awkward, this machine, because ideally it's a vertical leg press, and with it being on a Swift machine, it's quite easy for it to fall off. So if you have got a gym with machines, then use them. A lot of people did give machines a bad reputation all them years ago, which I don't understand why. A lot of people were saying, oh, because it doesn't give you the ability to train the stability muscles, but in reality, we want to be improving muscle mass. So if you can do that in a controlled way, use machines as much as possible. And as I get onto later on in the video, if you are more worried about mobility, flexibility, and the maneuverability of your body, then you will have to do specified training for that. Now, going back to metabolic dysfunction. So when it goes wrong, we then are unable to use and store fuel within the body. So we like to use fat as an energy source. We like to use sugar as an energy source. They're the two main ones overlapping. Ideally, we like to use fats from rest up until the top of zone 2, which is all governed by heart rate zones and lactate. And then glucose starts to kick in, probably zone 2, zone 3, all the way up until about zone 4. And then we use other energy sources at the very top, such as glycogen, phosphocreatine, etc. This, because it's not the proper thing, is so sore on your Achilles, but it's the only thing I've got to do in Nordic at the moment. But they are unbelievable. Now, whilst I'm doing these Nordic curls, which I'll get onto, I'll have to go through metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance as an overview, so it might be a bit complex, but insulin resistance is basically where the body starts to ignore the signals of insulin. And what insulin normally does is, once it binds onto a cell, it puts these little transporter tubes onto it, which allows sugar to come into the cell. Now, when this doesn't happen, it then allows sugar to accumulate within the blood. And like I said on previous videos, sugar and fats and protein all have the ability to change into one another. But sugar, once it's being used and there is an excess amount, it will like to go into fat. So if you think about the body then putting more fat out because it's converting all the sugar into it, that then will be transported into the cells of the muscles, and eventually this increased amount of fat within the muscle cell will then impair this pathway even more. So that's why it's so beneficial to build muscle. By far my weakest muscle, and I always get scared of Nordics because you feel like something's going to snap, but unbelievable. And this is quite different really. So how you go about training the muscle can be completely different on a different day. So here, Nordic curls, I do them more for durability. So you can see here, when I'm lowering myself down, I am obviously stretching the hamstring. I'm putting it under a lot of tension. And then when I help myself back up, I am trying to use as much force as I can through my hamstring, which will build strength. It should build a bit of stress on it, and which will force it eventually to grow. But listening back to what I've just said about metabolic dysfunction, I know it went a bit complex, but in the end, we need to make sure that we are building enough muscle so that we can combat the excess fat that may be stored there and reduce the chances of developing insulin resistance. There are other ways that we can sensitize the body to insulin. They are through zone 2 training, VO2 max. They're in another topic. But from the point of view of muscle, it is one of the biggest glucose sinks. And what that means is if we have a lot of sugar within our diet, the muscle loves to store it. It is one of the biggest stores within the body for sugar. So by increasing the amount of muscle mass, it will then remove this excess amount of sugar from the blood. Now, obviously, this is a very, very complex topic, and this is actually harder because I'm voicing over it whilst watching a video. So there may be things that may not come out as what I would like because this is not scripted, but we will get there. Now let's go on to something that's less scientific, and it's all about how to build muscle. Now, hopefully throughout this whole video, which I will have cut quite a lot of it, I've done a lot of warm-up sets up to this point. I do about 3 to 4 working sets, which means that at the very top weight, I'm performing about 6 to 8 reps where the muscle is fully under strain. Have a bit less rest time on carbs, and then probably do a bit more volume because you're constantly on them all day. So they're a lot more resistant. I'll get on to that point. Obviously, it's quite hard. I've done a bit of live recording and then tried to see if I could put it into it. When you are putting the muscle under load, you are then able to stress it, and then that forces natural growth. Now, in this case, hopefully you can see that I try and control the eccentric form of the movement. So in this case, it is the portion where I am taking the load of the weight, which is on a downward portion on calf raises. I then go up at a reasonable rate. However quick you go up basically trains power, and it will train a bit of strength as well, but it's mainly relating to power. A lot of people tend to take the same approach for every muscle group. Like I've just said before in that comment, I tend to have a lower waiting time, tend to do a lot more reps on my calves because they are a muscle that are highly resistant. You are on them every single day. You take one step and you're basically putting your whole body weight onto that single calf muscle. So I train each muscle according to potentially how they would function, and hopefully that should give me the best results. Now, my muscle mass, if you're looking at this thinking, why is he giving advice? I mean, it's not the worst. It could be improved. I feel like it is nearly at the right balance where you've got the right amount of weight on the skeleton, but then not too much to then cause any further heart strain, which is something I've always been interested in. We always go on about muscle mass. This video was about it, and lean mass being so beneficial. But at what point does that become detrimental to your health? Because like with anything, there is always a cut-off. There's always a bell-shaped curve. And I've never really known that when it comes to muscle gaining. Now let's take some practical advice out of this. So if you actually look at this workout, I ended up doing some leg presses. I went into Nordic curls. I've done some calf raises. And now I'm doing some, so it's like glute bridge, hip thrusters sort of exercises. I actually don't know the actual term for this one, but basically, as you can see, the foot that's anchored on the bench, I'll be activating the hamstring and glute on that side, and then just putting the weight there just adds a bit more resistance. This is a completely different workout to potentially how I would have worked out even 3-4 years ago. I would mainly be doing a lot more volume. I would probably be doing 10 sets on each exercise. So this leg day probably would have been leg press for 10 sets. And this is all after a warm-up. I would have been doing 3 to 4 heavy, then going down on a little rest to 3 sets of probably something where I could do 8 reps, and then a further reduction where it's 30 seconds in between and doing more. The difference now is that, yes, it is so important to build muscle, but also it is just as important to make sure that you are able to function, move on a daily basis. And I was at the point where potentially my nervous system was overloaded, and I was waking up every morning as though I'd been hit by a bus. Not that that's something that I can actually relate to, but you get the point, is that every morning I was waking up, I was not ready to do any activity until later on in the day. Whereas now I train with less intensity, but I do train every single day. And that's probably more important for me, is Not so much how much I can lift at any one point or how much volume I can go through. It's more about how repeatable is it on a daily basis. Now, I'll be honest, before making this video tonight, I didn't have that much motivation. It's a Friday evening, it's dark outside, and I didn't want to do a leg day, but because I know the importance of muscle building, which hopefully you found out throughout this video, and how to go about it in a more efficient way, then hopefully you'll include it a bit more within your routine. And before I started filming this workout tonight, I'd done an extensive warm-up with a lot of mobility. I just obviously included the work and sets, but alongside strength training, you should be making sure that you are including mobility because it is vital for functionality and improving your ability to move the older that you get. So if you are interested in it or you are unaware of how to do it, then there should be a video somewhere around here of where I went through a simple routine, mainly focusing on hamstrings and hips. Any suggestions about the next video, let me know. And if you've got this far, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.